Hello and welcome to part one of Warm Light Morning. I'm George Coll. This is part one of a three-part series, as I said, Warm Light Morning. And today was block-in. And we use some thinners to thin out the paint and cover the whole canvas with value color. So we go through that step by step. And we're using some new brushes and some new materials, and I'm also using Coll as a medium, and cleans the brushes well and it thins your paint out. And for this stage of the painting, it's really good. So let's get started. But I want to remind you to get outside and paint. It's important for you to train yourself outside. That's what I did for my first 2 years of painting outside with landscapes. So, let's get to today's painting. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hello and welcome again to another three-part series. I'm George Coll, and this is called Warm Light Morning. And again, it's up on Boulder Creek, west of Boulder, Colorado. And the challenge here is how to paint high contrast, with light coming in and all these subtle values in the area that is not receiving light. So everything in these lower part of the painting is going to be in shadow, and also some area on the left and area on the right. And then that light's going to be a little bit more of a strong contrast up in the upper right, and kind of an angle as it comes in from the left. So I'm going to be using a product that's going to help spread my paint around and make it dry quickly. It's called Coll. You've heard me talk about it before. And let's go ahead and get started with mixture. So I'm going to start with ultra blue and transparent oxide brown, or transparent brown oxide, I think is what it actually says. I think this is a Rembrandt color, or no, this is actually a Holbein product. Holbein. So you can see it's really dark. And those two mixtures just really go well together. If you want to get a little bit of green in it, and throw a little bit of yellow ochre in it. I mean, not much. Now, I'm not using any white, and I'm going to use a soft brush, which is really good for putting in this kind of abstract shape stuff here. As you can see how gooey it is from the overhead. And I'm going to say, okay, the water is going to be it's going to be below center, so somewhere in there. And then I have an angle coming in here. And then I have a dark over here. Dark's up in there. And I think this is a little higher. I think there's a bush over here somewhere. I'm trying to get my line straight here. It's always better to work this out on a sketch on a piece of paper before you get started, which I did not do. So I know I do a lot of teaching of do what I say, not what I do, and that's another example of it. Mixing up some more product. And should be mixing that with my knife, not my brush, but trying to get this stuff moving along here quickly so we can do this in one take. Now to do, I think just try to get some placement of where these pine trees are. See, I'm not using the end of my brush so much. I'm using the sides. And there's another one right in here. The other thing, this is more of a square reference, and I have more of a rectangle. And the Gamsol dries pretty quick, but not as quick as turpentine. But turpentine in the studio is pretty deadly. I introduced that to some of my co-painters. We were gone up in Wyoming, and one of those people is with me today on Zoom. Jan is with me from Prescott. And we all met up in Wyoming, and we experimented with turpentine because it dries so quick. Alrighty, so these are a little too dark, and dark should be thin, not thick. And since I put a little bit of yellow ochre in there, you can see this hint of green in there. All right, let's change. I'm going to clean my brush. Gamsol is really good for cleaning too. And I have very little of this product left. I mean, look, if you put it on the edge of my knife, see how little it is? But it sure took up a lot of area. But I'm going to use some Rembrandt Coll Gray next. I'm going to add a little bit of brown to it and just a little bit of blue. Now to make something lighter at this stage of the painting, I'm not adding white. White is hard to dry. So I'm going to go into my gray. And I'm working my gray right up. There's more gray on the top here of the reference. And then there's less gray down here. So I'm going to put in some hard gray in just a few places. But the rest I'm just going to put this thin, see how I can just give this thin brush over it. And let me thin that out a little bit, and I think there's like a little area here that shows some water coming down out of the darker gray. And I'm bringing some of my darks down into the water. I don't know why I didn't put some dark over here, but I'll have to catch that later on the lower right. And let me go back to that gray just a little bit. And again, I have to try to find where that little waterfall thing is. This thing is kind of like just a soft brush. This is a primer bristle creative mark, and it's very good for keeping things kind of soft edged here. All right, so I have cleaned that off my palette and I'm ready to move on to my next stage. And I'm going to make a blue, I'm going to make kind of a dark green. So here's my blue, my yellow ochre. I'm going to add some transparent oxide red. Oop, too much transparent oxide red. Sorry. Back to blue. Yellow ochre. Yellow ochre. And I'm going to add some cad yellow. Medium. Too green. Come on, I got to get warm here. Excuse me 1 second while I get some more yellow ochre out. And here we go. Yellow ochre. And let me put the top back on. And let's go back to blue. Let's go back to yellow ochre. Yellow ochre. Yellow ochre. Cad yellow medium type stuff, which is Hansa yellow, I believe. And I am ready to get back to my soft brush right here. I put some Gamsol in it, and now I'm going to be putting some of that in here. There's kind of a line of this coming down right in here. And I'm going to pick some of that up. And you can see it has a nice value to it. And again, I'm going to go back with this more horizontal strokes, I think, kind of horizontal, but a little bit of a lift here. All right, let's add a little bit more yellow to it. And let's go over the right side and put some I think some of this light actually comes in here pretty far on some of this stuff. Alrighty. And then I know these are cool rocks down here, but I want to put more warm on there than we show. And let me clean this up a little bit. I might have enough to save here a little bit. Let me move it over to the side. Alrighty, let's get that warm in here. So let's get some transparent oxide red, just a touch. And I've got some white left over from yesterday. What am I saying? Don't use white. Don't need it. It doesn't dry quickly enough. So let's just do transparent oxide red. And get my soft brush. And that's all we need. And I think we need some of that over in here too. And I think that will take care of it. All right, let's clean that up. And last but not least, let's get some sky in. So I'm just going to get some cobalt and some Gamsol. I'm so used to using white that I have to be careful with myself at this stage. And Gamsol. And that should do it for now. Okay, that screwed that up. Let's try that again. Just a little blue. There we go. And that is our blocking for this. I think I'm gotta get some darks over in a few places. Here and here. And if you're using Gamsol, you can see that it's already getting pretty dry. But it's going to take about 10 or 15 minutes. And so what I'm going to do is, earlier I started one which is very similar to this, and we will use that. Alrighty. Personally, I like this one better. It's got some better darks in it. But so give me a second while I erase this start I did here. And I will be ready to go. And one more clean, and I should have this done. Alrighty, back at it. So now let's start on the bottom and work with water, okay? So as you can see, and I've been preaching a lot, is try to control your palette so you don't have little piles everywhere. And I use two things. I use to control my palette. One is my T7 palette knife, and the other one is just a flat edge razor blade. And it really does a good job on glass. Even when I'm in the field, I'm trying to control my palette so that my mixtures are a little purer and so forth. You know, at this stage that we have just done, it's pretty sloppy, and it's still important, but not as important as we go forward. Alrighty, my palette looks pretty good. So what am I going to do next? Let's work with the water. And what I'm going to do is step down to a little bit smaller brush, but in the same family. And so I'm going to be using a number 4 Rosemary Long Flat Series 279. So it's just kind of, it's even flared out a little bit. And it's going to do fine. Once it gets wet, it kind of puts itself back together. So if I'm going to be working with grays, I'm going to be needing blue and gray. So let me get my blue back up there because I just used all of it. And now we're kind of stepping into the next part of the painting, whereas we're working with color and value balance. Color and value balance. So I've got some Cool Gray by Remington out, and I've got my Ultra Blue. So it's all going to be in the kind of that cool family. All right, so let's make some gray. So we're making some gray and some blue. Now we're going to start getting into the white neighborhood. So you can see I have a dark, dark and a kind of a lighter light. And I'm going to be making an in-between right here. So I go dark, medium, and light. No mystery there. So now, let's go with this darker stuff first and see what happens. And this is probably as far as I'm going to get today, is working on this lower section, because I've got about 9 minutes left in this 30-minute session. So you can kind of see what I'm doing here with this blue-gray. What I like about the top of this, when I really look close at the reference, there's a little bit of ripple white up on the top. And I will get to that later. So where else can I find big darks in here? And so what I'm looking at is kind of in this lower left is a big dark area. Blue, gray. Gonna add just a little bit of alizarin to it. And I'm putting that in right here. Lower left. And then I think up here there's kind of a shelf with some darks in it also. Right in here. And that gets to be a little bit lighter gray right in here. So I'm going to my medium and my light. And I'm going to be searching other areas where I can use a medium light gray. I see a lot of it over on the lower right. And my darkest dark there is really where the water comes over the rock here, and on my lower left. That is my darkest dark down in here. This dark goes over to the right a little bit, past the falls. And I'm just putting in some very light strokes with the end of my brush, because there's not much paint on the end of that brush. And I just want to try to get some of that onto my canvas. Now to kind of spread that around, I'm going to flatten it a little bit with my knife. And now I'm going to start with the lighter values. I'm going to be using the same brush, and I want to determine how to paint that water coming over the waterfall. Of course, in your brain you want to say, well, that's white. But in actuality, if you get back and look at your reference, it's actually an ultra blue and white. So I'm going to get some stuff slopped over from the previous day, I think. Get some blue to one side and make a very light blue. So I have a light, medium, and dark. Don't think I'll be needing the dark, but I'm going to start with the medium. I'm going to add some Gamsol to the mixture, and I'm going to be laying that in to this kind of landing area. Everything's coming over the rocks, and there's a rock there I better paint in, huh? I'm going to put some of this also on the waterfall as it comes over. And I'll put a little bit of it up in here. And I see some of this at the very top. I may have the wrong brush for this, but I want to drag some of this over the top up there. It's a little too strong. Let me soften that a little bit. See, I just dried my brush with my towel, and I'm softening that. Okay. I see more of this coming down. We're going to spend a lot of time. We're doing it on time. Running out of time. And I'm going to bring some of this over in other areas too, using the side of my brush. And now I'm going to soften that. And I'm going to use a rosemary long filbert. That's a little too stiff, I think. I'm going to go to a softer brush. There's this really flat thing I have. It's called a rosemary long comber, and I'm going to be softening some of these strokes I put in. And that is going to keep us about where we should be on time-wise today. Alrighty, so I'm cleaning my brush. There we go, nice and clean. Alrighty, so with that brings us to the end of part one, where we blocked in the whole canvas with value color, really thin paints, and then we started here on the bottom with water. And we'll probably start there again tomorrow with part two. So again, thank you so much for coming by, and we will see you tomorrow in part two. All right.